What is up, Substance? Make some noise wherever you're at. You made it to church, and I'm so glad you did. Hey, wherever you're at, both in downtown or if you're watching online, I'm Pastor Peter Haas. Of course, my wife and I are the lead pastors of Substance, and today we are in the middle of our teaching series called Perspective. Perspective. And really there's the thesis behind this is there's just a lot of people who are lacking the big picture view of their lives, and as a result they just end up making short-term decisions that equal long-term regret. Have you ever made a short-term decision that led to long-term regret? I just every single week I talk to college students who are acquiring debt instead of acquiring an education. And they haven't stopped there's people that regret that. There's 20-somethings who built their careers rather than their character in their 20s. And they wish they could kind of take it back and focus on first things first. There's a lot of engaged couples who are building a wedding rather than a marriage, or young parents building a house rather than a family. You see, the world is filled with short-sighted habits. And so really, the whole idea behind this series is helping us to kind of prioritize the right things, put it all in perspective, and explore some life lessons that'll just really help you and I gain perspective in our lives. And so, and today is going to be extra fun too. We're all video at all campuses, and I'm actually preaching at a church in Florida, and yet I was so passionate about this message that I really wanted to deliver this on perspective. And of course, as a pastor over the years, I've had a lot of people come to me with prayer requests, and this is kind of an interesting thing, and I need all of you to really lean into this. Over the years, I love praying for people, and part of it is because I know that prayer works. Every time we pray, something happens in heaven. And don't get me wrong, God doesn't always do what I want in the timeline that I want it, but I do believe that something always happens when we pray and seek God. But the reason why I share this is because I've noticed over the years, for most people, when I ask them what's their prayer request, they usually have, I like to call it an if-only prayer request, okay? In other words, there's an if-only lingering behind their prayer, and this is okay, it's not wrong to have this, but for example, if only I was married. I need you to pray for a spouse, Pastor Peter. Or if only I had kids. I need you to pray that we can get pregnant. If only I had this job instead of that job, right? If I only had that boss instead of this boss. If I only had this income, that opportunity, then I would be happy. And there's kind of this assumption lurking behind the prayer request. Not always, but there's a lot of times this assumption that I can't be happy until I get this, and so my prayer is blah, okay? And the reason why I'm even sharing this, because if I could confess one of my if-only prayers over the years, where I conditioned my happiness one time upon a certain prayer, is if only I could have a publishing deal. I wanted to write books, right? I wanted to have a book that could get out there, okay? And I'm going to share this dream, and I'm going to get a little vulnerable with you today, because I don't know what your dream is, but as I tell the story of my dream, maybe you'll be able to relate to a little bit of this. Many of you guys know that back in college, I was an English major, and I loved writing, and I've always had the dream of writing books. In fact, even when I was in college at the University of Minnesota, I won a national contest for poetry and beat out like 50,000 other applicants. And so I was really into this. I had kind of my little badges of pride that kind of pointed me in this direction. And like a lot of dreams, though, my dream of writing a book was not happening, and I started getting frustrated at times that it wasn't happening in the timeline that I wanted, and I wasn't getting the opportunities that I wanted. And so one of my constant prayers, and I probably prayed this a little too much, okay? God, would you open up doors for me to write books? God, would you open up doors for me to write books? I probably should have been praying for character, but I was constantly praying, God, would you open up doors for me to write books? And of course, my poor wife, Carolyn, had to listen to me whine all the stinking time. I think I asked her, when do you think it's going to happen? When do you think it's going to happen? Why isn't it happening? Why isn't it happening? She had to listen to me whine all the stinking time. Come on. Any of you spouses out there know what I'm talking about, all right? So I finally thought, you know what, I'm not going to whine anymore. I'm just going to start. I'm just going to start writing books. I'm going to be faithful in the little things. And so I started writing books, and I just wrote on the topics that I was most passionate about. but I just knew my first book would be life-changing, right? Because it was important to me, right? And I thought, if it helps me, then it'll help somebody else. And everybody seemed interested in this topic when I would share it with them, and I thought, for sure, after I finish writing this book, I'll get it out there, someone's going to see it, and I'm going to get a publishing deal, and then I'll republish it. And sure enough, I wrote it, and guess what? Nothing happened. And it was weird. It was like, why? This is good. I think this is good. Carolyn, why isn't this good? And okay, so maybe it wasn't the greatest book, okay? But so then I thought, I'm going to keep writing, okay? So I wrote my second book. And then, nothing happened, right? And then in 2009, I finished my third book. And, both of these, the second and third book, these were amazing books. But the only problem was, nobody else thought so. You know what I'm saying? That was a lot of people, they have the gift of speaking, but then here's the question, do people have the gift of listening to you? You know what I'm saying? I thought I had the gift of writing, but do people have the gift of reading my writing, okay? Honestly, it kind of sent me spiraling for a while, and once again, my poor wife had to be the brunt of all my questions and all of my internal angst. God, what's going on? Why is this so hard for me? What am I doing wrong? And what kind of adjustments do I need to be making? And a lot of times, she would just lead me to prayer, like, okay, let's just trust God, okay? And to make matters worse, and this is how it always works with every dream, when whatever it is you're dreaming about, then somebody comes into your life, and it always seems so easy, right? I kept meeting all of these authors who were not only getting publishing deals, but getting paid huge quantities of money. And yet, what really irked me is about the majority of these guys, they were terrible writers. They had no desire to even be a decent author. Heck, 80% of them didn't even write their own stinking books, right? They just hired a ghostwriter through their sermon series at some dude, and that dude wrote it in their name, right? And of course, my wife had to listen to me rant. Again, this isn't fair. Why this? Why that? Why this? Why that? And honestly, if I could just be really honest with you, and maybe there's a few of you out there who you have that same kind of angst in your soul, okay? As I look back on my life, I'm actually kind of embarrassed. I'm embarrassed when I talk to my wife and when I think about this. In some ways, I was a terrible husband because I allowed my discontentment in this area to become a burden for my wife. And in church, hear me out. When you don't deal with your discontentment, it will not only be a burden for your spouse, but it can ultimately be a burden for your family, for your coworkers, for your extended family. And that's the problem with idolatrous dreams, is there's always a price on those around us. And we're actually gonna talk about this a little bit in the Bible text that we're about to dive into. And truth be told, if I could just fast forward the story, as I look back on those first 3 books, they were awful. They were awful. Every time I hear that somebody reads one of those books, I just want to apologize to them. I wish I could do like a nationwide recall on my original writing. You know what I'm saying? Here's the deal. There were, and I can't be too hard on myself because, let's be honest, there's all sorts of terrible books out there. You know what I'm saying, right? Whenever I feel awful about myself, I always just look at the terrible books on the internet. And so I've been collecting terrible book titles and terrible book covers over the years, and I thought I'd show a couple to you real quick, okay? Can I show these real quick? Because this is what I do whenever I get depressed. I just kind of look at these other books and think, okay, maybe you're not so bad. Okay, these are real book covers that seem to encourage me. The first one is a picture of a book called Why Cats Paint. It's the question we've all been asking, you know what I'm saying? Like, what? Whenever I feel like my books are irrelevant, I just think of that book, you know what I'm saying? And then, okay, so now this next book is called How Not to Read. Now, the only problem with this book title is, well, the audience you're trying to reach is, well, they don't read books, okay? That's why nobody read my book. Okay, so the next book is called The History and Social Influence of the Potato. And if you're out there thinking, how do I maximize the influence of my potatoes, okay? Or how do I reduce my kids' exposure to predatory potatoes? Okay, this is your book, okay? Our next book, my favorite, personal favorite, is called Do It Yourself Coffins. Okay, why pay the money when you can do it yourself? I mean, they're a great gift to people. Besides, it's really hard to appreciate your own coffin sometimes. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Okay, so now this next book is the sequel. It's called Fancy Coffins. Okay, so you got a few coffins under your belt, right? Your first coffin was good enough for Aunt Susie, but it's time to get fancy. Okay, let's give death a little dazzle. Okay. The next book is called What's Wrong with My Snake? Okay, there's just there's a lot of us out there who, we've got snakes, but we just don't want to call a veterinarian, right? I mean, we want to poke around a bit, you know what I'm saying? It's the do-it-yourselfers of the snake community, right? Now, and similar to this next book, the next book is called Outwitting Squirrels. Okay, so you have a squirrel problem, and you're dumber than a squirrel, okay? This is your book, okay? Congratulations. Apparently, I love this. It actually says it's the second edition, you know what I mean? Like, okay, the first edition, well, let's just say I had to refine a few of my techniques. Okay, so now this final book is called, and it's very helpful, especially as we go into the fall, Knitting with Dog Hair. So you've been wondering what to do with all that excess dog hair, and your last dog hair sweater didn't last very long. Here is the solution for you. Okay, so now, here's why I'm showing these, okay? Whenever I get depressed, I simply look at these book covers and remind myself, Peter, you're probably not alone. Maybe there's a few of us who are waiting on God for people to realize this is a bestseller. You know what I'm saying? Maybe there's other people out there who had a dream and who are just hoping that somehow they're going to write something that will change the world, and it's not happening yet. Well, okay. Let me one more fast forward here in the story. Fast forward to 2012. 2012 is when the dream finally started coming to pass. I had 3 different major book publishers come knocking on my door, and I got to really write my first national book, probably the first book I actually was truly proud of writing, and it's, of course, a book that you guys have heard of. The other books you didn't hear of, and there's a reason. But the book that you did hear was Pharisectomy, How to Remove Your Inner Pharisee and Other Religiously Transmitted Diseases. And, let me tell you, church, I will never forget the day my publisher told me, Peter, your book is now an Amazon bestseller. And I was like, yeah. In fact, they even gave me, to commemorate it, they even gave me a framed version of my book cover just to kind of celebrate, you're an Amazon bestseller, let's celebrate this, and here it is. And then on top of that, my book got translated into several languages so I can traumatize people all over the world with my writing. It's amazing. It's exciting stuff. And now, here's why I'm telling you this story. You would think that day when my publisher called me to tell me, you finally have a bestseller, you would think that day would be a day that was just absolutely filled with joy, filled with satisfaction, filled with gratitude, filled with excitement. But if I could be truly honest with you, you know what? Instead of feeling happy or thrilled that day, the weirdest thing happened. I became anxious again. And what do I mean? The entire day I was like, wow, so if I have a bestseller, then why aren't my social media numbers doing better than they are? You know what I'm saying? Like, if I had a bestseller and I had all the royalty receipts and my publisher made $300,000 off this book, how come I made nothing? You know what I'm saying? How come I just got myself out of the hole, right? I broke even on the book, okay? Why did that happen? Okay, then my next thought was, why aren't my blogs doing better? Doggone it, why can't I get these blogs going? why does it seem so hard to try to get these things moving forward? And God, why can't I seem to find the right book lawyer, right, to help me do the next contract better? And why can't I find the right agent that's similar to this author out there? And how come at my local Barnes & Noble I don't see my book featured there? And in other words, instead of being thrilled, you know what happened? All I did was start worrying about another dream. That's all I did. And then another dream, and then another problem, and then another problem, and then another problem. You see, and when we got the good news, I'm sure that my wife was probably hoping, finally, my husband will stop ranting. Once he hears he has an Amazon bestseller, finally, my husband will feel affirmed, and that vacuum in his heart of discontentment will somehow be satisfied, and he won't need me to console him every other night. But you know what? Guess what? It probably took less than 24 hours before I started whining about my next dream. And so today, church, can I just set you free from all of your circumstantial chains once and for all? And I realize that it won't happen once and for all today, but I want to at least start it for those of you who have this uncontained discontentment. I just want to set you free by quoting 1 John, and it's kind of a classic. It's a classic scripture. Just here to explain the things of the world, the lust of the flesh, the boasting of what we have and do comes not from the Father, but from the world. I love how it says, everything in the world. You see, there's stuff that's just worldly. There's things, the boasting of what we have and do, half of these personal ambition dreams, they're not even God dreams. It's like the old saying goes, if God answered all your prayers, would it change the world or would it just change you? And even if it changed the world, is that really the timing and the way that God wants us to do it? You see, at the end of the day, I ultimately believe there is no circumstance that will satisfy us, not over time. Not a circumstantial thing, okay? And if you really want to know how lasting joy works, okay, the answer is in Psalm 16:11, which says this: God will fill us with joy in His presence. God will fill us with joy. Where? In His presence. Now, who fills us with joy? God, not our circumstances, okay? Do you hear that? So any big decision you're making, discontentment-wise, that's circumstantial, let me tell you, that's not going to last very long for you. In fact, actually, all the research shows your current happiness and current contentment is the best predictor of your future contentment. Right? A happy single person is a happy married person. That's why, again, so who fills us with joy? God, not circumstance. Where do we find joy, according to this verse? In His presence. Not in perfect circumstances, because that'll never happen anyway. We'll never have it all doctored up just right. And that's why I'm sharing all this, because that really sets up the Bible story I want to quickly hit, which is the Old Testament story of Hagar in Genesis chapter 16. And if you don't know Genesis 16, it's the story of a young woman who's mistreated by her family. And she felt passed by in life because she couldn't have kids. And of course, you know, she felt mistreated by her boss. She felt underappreciated by her husband. And so, like a lot of people who were mistreated, she made the classic decision to run away. And I love her story because I think that all of us at some point in our lives are going to feel passed by. We're going to feel even mistreated, like the inequity of the world in regards to our dreams and how that all kind of spins out. And eventually, you know, so she makes this decision to run away, to get out of this mistreatment and kind of live life on her terms. And yet, you know, like a lot of times when we run away from problems, it doesn't actually solve our problems, right? And she eventually has a breakdown moment, and God sends her an angel to tell her to go back, okay? Which, can I just say, this was not what she wanted to hear, right? She's running away to get away from mistreatment, and then this angel of the Lord is telling her to do the exact opposite. Listen to what God says, Genesis chapter 16, verse 9. He says to Hagar, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." Wait a second, God, time out. You realize that this is the same woman who is mistreating me, right? You get that, right? You see that, right? You know that this woman is mistreating me, And God's basically saying, I'm literally asking you to go back. That's right, I'm asking you. I am asking you to go back to a situation in which you are mistreated. Now, in saying this, keep in mind there's a difference between mistreated and that's different than abused, okay? So, and I want to clarify that. Unfortunately, nowadays, anything that's mistreatment, we also classify as abuse, right? My parents are abusing me. Well, what did they do? Well, they won't pay my car payment anymore. You're 29 years old, okay? That's not abuse, okay? Anyway, so you get the idea. I think a lot of times we just kind of call everything abuse, right? Well, again, keep in mind, God was not calling Hagar to put herself in harm's way, yet he was calling her to endure mistreatment, to go back to injustice for a season until the proper time. And we could sit here and ask why would he do that? Why would he do this? But listen, that's not the point of what we're going to do here today, but God does say this, okay? If you do this, Hagar, God said, if you're willing to obey me here, then I will give you innumerable descendants, okay? I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to set you up, but I need you to suffer for a season. Now, I point that out because I think that a lot of people don't get this, that God does call us to suffer. In fact, even just do a Bible word study of suffering. I do believe that God, in fact, one Bible verse says, I've chosen you, he says about the Apostle Paul, I've chosen you to suffer. And God was actually saying it as an honor, like, I'm choosing you to suffer. You see, I think for a lot of us, we just, that's incompatible with our concept of God. Right? Yeah, but I thought God said that he came that I might have life to the fullest. Well, yeah, sometimes in order to get to life in the fullest, it requires a little suffering. Yeah. All right, so Hagar, she goes back, she obeys, and of course, if you keep reading the story, eventually things did eventually get tough again, and she goes away again, but this time, she actually does have a little boy, so God did fulfill the promise. She did get pregnant. She has a little boy, but this time she gets into a tough situation again. She's way out in the desert, has no water, and of course, in her hopelessness, she finally says, you know what, we're all going to die here. I don't want to watch my son die, so she abandons her son under a tree to die, and then she goes off quite a distance just to die as well. She figures this is it. And she just sat down and waited to die. And of course, God, in the midst of her hopelessness, once again, he saw her and he sent an angel to go rescue both of them. And of course, in the process of the conversation, God actually reveals to them, hey, your life isn't as bad as you think. There's an oasis. And all of a sudden, boom, there's an oasis she didn't even see, okay? So God magically delivers them. But, okay, now, and we're going to go into some specific parts of this passage, but the reason why I'm bringing all this up here, okay, the reason why we're talking about this is because I really believe that God reveals a pattern in the story of Hagar, and we're going to quickly dive into it, but here's the gist, okay? A lot of Christians get this idea that the plan of God is supposed to be pain-free. If I experience pain, then I have the legal right to accuse God. You know what I'm talking about, people who get mad at God, okay? If God really sees me, then he's always going to deliver me through the path of least resistance. And yet what we fail to comprehend through the process of all the different characters throughout the Bible, that quite often, it's the very process of pain that qualifies us. In other words, the pain is ironically the very key that God is giving us to unlock the door that he wants us to walk through. Heck, God is up in heaven sometimes thinking, man, if I didn't use pain, you wouldn't even get up off your duffer. You know what I'm saying? Like, you wouldn't even do anything if there wasn't pain. Let's be honest. Pain is probably one of the greatest catalysts for growth in our personal lives. And so once we understand that pain is not the absence of God seeing us, that it's actually part of the process, part of the tool belt, it causes us to think differently about what God is doing in our lives and how God might be actually answering our prayers, okay? When we understand this process, God actually takes Hagar through a 3-step process And once you understand it, the whole process becomes less scary. In other words, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to normalize pain being a part of the process, okay? And if I could put it this way, the presence of pain does not mean the absence of God, okay? The presence of pain in your life does not mean the absence of God in your life. And oftentimes, the presence of pain is actually the evidence that God's vision and provision is about to come into our lives. And so some of you actually, if you saw things the way God sees it, you would actually see your current difficulty as the evidence of everything is about to change for the better. Come on. And let me spell this out a little more detailed. Okay, so let's go to Genesis 16:9. Let's go into specifically what the angel says to Hagar in Genesis chapter 16, verse 9. The angel says, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." Okay, so in other words, what the angel says to her is painful obedience. I need you to do what you do not want to do right now. Painful obedience, okay? And if you do that, the angel added, verse 10, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." In other words, he gives her vision, okay? Let me cast vision for your life. Let me give you a promise about your life. It will happen. You will get pregnant. You will, in fact, not only you're going to get pregnant, but you're going to have descendants that are too numerous to count. Okay, so God's dream for your life is infinitely greater than your dream for your life. In fact, you can't even count how big God's dream is for your life, okay? So if you do this painful obedience, here's some vision. And verse 11, the angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child and you will have a son." Provision, okay? So painful obedience followed by vision, followed by provision. There's a process, 3 steps: painful obedience, vision, provision. And I think it's interesting that the angel actually points out, heck, it's already happening. You don't even know it, but it's already happening. Let me tell you something about yourself that you don't even see. Let me tell you about how pregnant you actually really are. You think it's forever off, and yet God knows, it's less than 8 months out. You know what I'm saying? God knows things about our timelines that we don't even know, right? So, but it starts this way: painful obedience, vision, provision. Let me give you another example of this in Genesis 21. Okay, so this is the second time she's off, and she abandons her son under the bush, right? And so she starts walking away in order to die. And check out what the angel says, Genesis 21, verse 18. Once again, gives her some instructions on painful obedience. Do something you don't want to do. Lift up the boy and take him by the hand. Now, what do I mean? Why is that painful obedience? Because she abandoned the boy and stopped walking. She's given up in life. And the angel is like, you can't give up. You put that boy back on his feet because you're going to walk. You're going to go. You don't want to walk right now. That's why you laid him down and abandoned him and you went to lay down to die. Instead, I want you to do the exact opposite of what your flesh is telling you to do. I want you to put him back on his feet, and I want you to get up on your feet and take him by the hand. Painful obedience, right? But then he follows it up with, hey, I'm not just going to ask you to painfully obey. I'm going to give you vision for your life. For, he says, I will make him into a great nation. Once again, bigger than you think. I'm going to give you vision. I'm going to give you a promise to hold on to. I'm going to remind you of the same promise that I told you back in chapter 16 that you've already abandoned. You've given up on that. You just thought, it's not happening, therefore I'm going to die. You know what I'm saying? And God's like, first off, you're not going to die, because the fact that you think you're going to die is actually insulting to me because you don't believe I'm going to take care of you, okay? I already told you this promise. That means I'm going to make it happen. You're not going to make it happen. I'm going to make it happen. It's too big for you anyway, all right? For I will make him into a great nation. And then vision is followed by what? Provision. God actually gives you resources as evidence of this. Verse 19, then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Okay, she gets up, takes the boy by the hand, and all of a sudden, out there in the distance, boom, she sees the well of water, almost like she didn't see it before. It just like magically appeared. You see, sometimes you don't even have the vision to see what God sees until you get up and you start obeying what God is telling you to do. And yet, for many of us, unfortunately, we don't even take the first step. We don't get up. It's almost like we demand vision before painful obedience. We demand provision and vision before painful obedience. We don't want to go through the process in the order that God is bringing us. We don't want to exercise our faith. We're like, God, prove it to me first, and then I'll decide not to die. Okay? It's like we don't even take the first step. God tells us, don't quit your job, don't quit your job, don't quit your job. And then what do people do? I quit my job. I just can't stand it. You don't understand. It's abusive. I'm being mistreated, right? Or God will give us some other thing in our lives that we need to do or stop doing. Start tithing, and then I'm going to take care of your finances. Start exercising, then I'm going to heal your body, right? Stop skipping your small group. I know it's inconvenient. I know you haven't found your tribe yet, but you got to commit, okay? Stop pretending you're going to overcome fill in the blank on your own, okay? I didn't create you to figure that out on your own. You see, or something else that we don't want to hear. God will tell us painful obedience we don't want to hear, and then we say to him, well, God, clearly you don't see me, right? Or else you wouldn't even ask me to do that. And God's like, huh? Like, God's up in heaven thinking, loved ones, you don't even know what you don't know. You don't even see what you don't see. If you could just stop whining about your life just for a few minutes and obey, the process itself will qualify you. The process itself will reveal the vision and the provision that is right around the corner. And as one last example of this, I just, if I could kind of tie it up this way, maybe just bookend this Bible passage with this story even about my book. For the first decade that I pastored, particularly senior pastored, I did not have enough pastoral mentors. I think I had like one pastoral mentor, and it wasn't enough. I really believe that every person needs dozens of mentors for marriage, for parenting, for finances, for all of that. And I was so socially isolated and lonely, and I just had all my thoughts. And as a result of that, I overburdened my wife because of that. And about 16 years ago, I ended up meeting a pastor by the name of Billy Hornsby, and the moment I met him, I felt like the Lord just supernaturally impressed upon my heart, Peter, this is a man, you need to get close to him. You need to get mentored by him, or at the very least, if he doesn't have the time to mentor you, you got to get mentored by the people who serve him, right? Just do anything to be around him, take things off his plate, and if I could just be really honest with you, okay? I was kind of scared of him, okay? He used to be this Cajun state trooper, right, at one point, and he kind of looks like that. You know what I mean? He looked like a Cajun state trooper. He kind of scared me. I thought, in other words, I don't think I would have naturally chosen him based on chemistry or style, or, he's not like, he was different, right? And I didn't fully know how to reconcile that, aside from the fact that the Lord said, I don't care, you get close to him, do whatever he says, and whatever he asks you to do, whatever advice he tells you, you need to apply it no matter how you feel and no matter how inconvenient it is. And let me tell you something, he gave me some inconvenient advice time and time and time and time and time again. He would ask me to do, to make these adjustments early on in the history of substance. He would ask me to, hey, Peter, you need to stop thinking like this. You need to, I know you think that's what will grow your church. You need to change this to this. And he'd ask me to do inconvenient things. He'd ask me to fly places. You know who you need to meet with? You need to meet with so-and-so, and you need to fly there now, okay? And then he would ask me to do things like, Peter, I need you to help me write my books. And Peter, I need you to mentor this pastor who nobody else wants to mentor. And I'd be like, why me? And because I don't want to mentor him. Okay, Billy, I'll do it. Okay, so I would mentor people, and a lot of this was done on my own dime, okay? So, and sometimes it would be, in the busiest season of my life, and there were times, I got to be honest with you, I got an attitude about what he said to me sometimes. And there was even a moment where I thought, am I even getting anything out of this relationship? Because I pretty much feel like I'm just doing things for you. I'm like your free assistant. I mean, heck, I wanted to write my own books, right? And yet I'm helping him ghostwrite his books. And what I didn't realize at the time was that God was actually testing my obedience to see if I was actually ready for His vision and His provision. And He needed to make sure that I was, soft clay in the hands of the potter. And He needed to test me in this. And so there was this one time when Billy asked me to do a very difficult favor. He asked me to fly to this small Midwestern school to speak to pastors. And of course, at this time, Substance was growing. I was crazy busy, and this is not a paid gig. In fact, Billy was asking me to fly there on my own dime and speak alongside him. In fact, I may not even speak at all, okay? I may fly all the way there just to hang out with Billy and not speak at all. And you have to understand, this is not vacation. These are like long, long days, dawn till dusk. And of course, this particular school where these pastors were going to be at, that we were teaching, the school, I'm telling you, the armpit of Ohio, okay? This is not like paradise. This is not like go on vacation, okay? This is like Farmville, and of course, even worse, this particular school, the pastors at this school, they're all super traditional, super legalistic, and I kept thinking, Billy, why are we even going there? And do you really think these pastors are going to receive from me, this weird, quirky, urban pastor? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just like, everybody thinks that I'm weird, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then these pastors, and then Billy goes, oh yeah, last second, Peter, I need you have to wear a suit when you come, because they're all wearing 3-piece suits. In fact, it's a requirement of the school. And I kept thinking, what school still requires pastors to do that? Like in my head, I was like, heck no. Billy, do you understand? These are the types of pastors who treat me like I'm a compromised idiot for naming a weird name of my church. You know what I'm saying? Like, besides, if I have to wear a 3-piece suit while I preach, I'm going to feel like the compromised, inauthentic idiot, right? And yet the Lord kept telling me every single time I wanted to resist it, Peter, remember, do whatever He asks you to do, even if it's hard. Do whatever He asks you to do, even if it's hard. So I took a deep breath and I cleared my schedule. I bought my ticket with my money. I dusted off that old odd suit that doesn't even fit me, that I only use for weddings every now and again. And I'm not going to lie, you guys, that trip was a tough trip for me. These pastors, I didn't naturally relate to them. And yet, you know what? Looking back, that trip is actually a very, very special trip for me. And you know why? Because that was one of the last trips I ever got to take with Billy. You see, at the time, none of us knew that he had a super advanced form of cancer, and it was only a very short while, weeks after that he ended up going home to be with the Lord. And, I'll never forget, I got to have one last conversation with Billy before he died. I actually, the moment the cancer, we realized how bad it was, I immediately flew to Alabama to sit with him by his bed. And he turned to me and he said, Peter, I just want to thank you for helping me write my books. And by the way, thank you for flying places with me. I know it was painful for you. I knew that I was kind of throwing you into these speaking situations that were not comfortable for you whatsoever, but you know what? You were faithful when other people weren't faithful and wouldn't have been. And he said, you know what? I want you to know this, but the Lord just spoke to me that you're supposed to write a book, and He actually gave me the title for your book. And I was like, really? Like, what do you mean? He's like, well, the Lord spoke to me. You're supposed to write a book, and this is the title. And I'm like, well, what is it? And he goes, you need to write a book on religiously transmitted diseases called pharisectomy. A lot of people thought that I came up with that title. I actually didn't. It was Billy, or it was the Lord through Billy. And he ended up going on to be with the Lord. And as I look back on my life, almost every good thing in my ministry career miraculously came out of as a direct result of me inconveniently serving this one man's advice. And before he died, he got me connected with my first major book publishing deal. He lent me $105,000 to plant my church called Substance. And almost every opportunity I've had, from preaching in London to China to Amsterdam to South Africa, all of it came indirectly because of serving this one man. And, the last thing he told me on his deathbed was this. He said, Peter, of all the things that made me happy, none of them were professional successes. None of them were even personal successes. In fact, all the things that actually brought me lasting joy were the moments where I helped other people reach their dreams. It was helping you, Peter, reach 1,000 members. It was helping Chris Hodges get into his first building. And it was, honestly, he goes, all of my truest mountaintops were actually helping other people reach their mountaintops. And as he spoke to me in those final moments of his life, I had a revelation. There is no circumstance that will make me happy. Why do we even worry about these things? And as long as I'm obsessed with my dreams instead of other people's dreams, and more importantly, God's dream, I'm going to miss out on the truly fulfilling things that make life powerful. And so here's the deal, church. God already has vision and provision for your life. He just needs you to open up to the painful obedience of today. And when you do that, I'm telling you, everything, it'll just line right up in the perfect timing of God. And so can we just do business with God right now? Just close your eyes wherever you're at. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the dreams that you've put in our hearts, and those dreams are there for a reason. And yet, God, it's so easy for us to misinterpret the timeline and the application of how those dreams will come to pass. I pray that you'd give us a kingdom-centric filter and an others-oriented filter that will enable us to go through the obedience that you're calling us to go through right now in this season of our lives. I pray that we would not burden our friends and families with undealt with discontentment, and that we would just experience your favor and your power flowing into our lives the same way it flowed through Hagar. Lord, you gave her the dream that you had for her life was far greater than her own, and I just pray that every single person would feel that reality come to bear on the circumstances that are represented here. We love you, we praise you, and we thank you for this moment. In Jesus' precious name we pray, and if you agree with that prayer, say amen. Amen. With all that said, we're going to have our campus pastors come on up and tell us where we're going to go next. I love you guys. We'll see you next week.